So he's gone through, I'm a good person, I can't do it. Laban should be killed, I can't do it. And so the Spirit tells him the third time in verse 12, slay him, for the Lord hath delivered him into your hands. And then the reasoning shifts. Now it shifts away from law of Moses and other worldly concerns to what does the Lord really want. And so you see the trial that Nephi is going through here. I really do need to do what the Lord wants me to do, not because of all these other reasons, but because it's the Lord.
And that's an important stepping stone.
And once he's reached that point, it gets easier for him, doesn't it? I mean, something is going on when he goes to Zoram. He's large in stature. I wonder how well Laban's armor fit him. I wonder if he really was a gifted mimic and could really...
well, his brothers accuse him later on, remember, of trickery. So it may be that he was good at it.
And yet, when we look at this whole account, and I think of, it's for the righteous purposes this is being done, and Nephi can't fully know all those righteous purposes yet. He'll know later when we see the visions he receives in chapters 10 through 14. But when he comes with Zoram, and some people want to present it so dark they couldn't see, but when they're even out in the dark and from a distance, his brothers think that it's Laban. But when he calls to them, his voice clearly from a distance they know is Nephi, and so they stop. And that's when Zoram's going to start to try to run and hightail it, and Nephi brings him down. And the question comes: so why does Zoram have to go with them? And I think it's not just the fact that if he doesn't, then he could tell on them. But in reality, Zoram's the only other person who has witnessed this deliverance, the deliverance of the Word. And the Word now that they're going to need, and that will literally preserve not just their nation, but it's preserving this nation and any in the world who believe it. It's, as we'll read later from Nephi, it's this record that will give the Gentiles in the latter days the last chance to save themselves from going down to destruction. And Nephi couldn't have known all of that, but Zoram can bear witness. I tell you, his voice sounded different and he looked different. Somehow the Lord, I think, was magnifying Nephi, and Zoram would be the only other witness. So we've got two witnesses of this deliverance because Zoram's there.
Can you imagine what they're teaching Zoram on the way back on the two-week trip back down to the Red Sea? I wish I could have been privy to some of those discussions they had. Meanwhile, what's happening back at home?
But don't forget, too, about Zoram. We'll have to have another person along because Ishmael has 5 daughters. Remember that?
That's right.
God is such a good stage director. He just seems to know people.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay, now back to the question. Meanwhile, what's going on back at home while the boys are off?
This is a difficult time for Mum, for Sariah. The boys have been gone for a long period of time, and it's taking longer than what she had anticipated. And she begins to worry about this and to ask questions.
Even questioning if Lehi really is a prophet.
Yeah, this must have been a terribly difficult time for her. Because when you think about it, Lehi left Jerusalem having had a revelation. He knew that God wanted him to do, but Sariah had no revelation like that. She went along because he was her husband and things like this. But I see this as being the fact that the boys come home safely for Sariah is her witness from the Lord that her husband is a prophet, and this is God's will. Once she has that witness, we don't hear her murmuring again. And it seems to me now she knows, and she can go off into the journey knowing that they're obeying God's will.
So her testimony came from witnessing this miracle.
Yeah.
Maybe that's another reason why God wanted the boys to have this experience, to bring Sariah along as well.
Well, this is another deliverance. She's been delivered from a trial and a test here, and we're just seeing these all over the place.
Sure, it was a happy reunion. Now, when we get to chapter 6, we have kind of just a little editorial note here from Nephi saying, now I'm keeping this record. I know the record is true. I'm writing the things that are really pleasing to God, but not so much pleasing to man, so to speak. But he writes this just to mention that they learned from this that they were descendants of Joseph. And they learned that from the plates of brass, which contains a genealogy. What else do the plates of brass contain?
The books of Moses, the prophecies of the prophets down to Jeremiah. But what's interesting here, and this is different from our Hebrew Bible, is that we're also going to, in addition to prophets like Jeremiah and Isaiah, we're also going to get the prophets of Zenos and Zenock and Nahum. And so we've got some additional information here that don't end up in the Bible that we have here. That may reflect that Laban's records were representative of a northern collection of scripture rather than just the southern.
Some suggest maybe Laban fled. Laban's forefathers fled when in 721 when they fell to Assyria, and that's what they were doing in the kingdom of Judah.
Those prophecies become very, very important in this book.
Now, chapter 7, they're back. They've read the records, and now it's time for them to go back to Jerusalem. This time Dad sends them back. This time not for records, but for
Wives.
The
No
wives.
murmuring this time.
Yeah, Laman and Lemuel are on this one. They're with us the whole way. At least the journey to Jerusalem. Yes.
So, what do you hope your students learn from chapter 7, this whole experience of going back for wives? What are the key points?
One of the things ought to be about, this is one of the key places to talk about the importance of marriage, and that the Lord really, I mean, otherwise, why bother to go back and get this other family if you don't need marriage and it's not essential? And it just is, it seems to us so logical, but it's the order of heaven, and it's necessary, and quite a remarkable family when you think that it's going to line up as it does, and apparently people are willingly marrying. I often think, what a wonderful thing to have someone to marry Nephi, but who's going to marry Laman and Lemuel? And they seem to do so very willingly, but it works out. And
Most couples deserve each other, don't they? Laman and Lemuel.
That's right. That seems to be the case.
They got it.
And you get the idea that Nephi probably married the gal that stuck up for him when his brother tied him
Verse
down.
19, you think there's a little romance going on there? And
probably already
chapter
started.
7, verse 19, when she rescues him, she may have had her eye on him already. But I think there's along with that, you have to say that in their journey down to probably the southern tip of the Arabian Peninsula, there were plenty of places where they could have picked up wives. What's going on here is you've got to get wives from a covenant people.
Correct.
You can't pick them up along the way.
Right kind of marriage.
Right kind of marriage.
Very good.
And the fact that they come, of course, as verse 5 tells us, is that all of them, not just Ishmael, their hearts were softened. Now, they may have wondered, well, okay, this is great to go get, who's really want to come? But we didn't want to go, and yet the Lord will soften their hearts. I think that's important.
Ishmael must have been a truly remarkable man, and his daughters as well.
Yeah.
I suspect all of them had experiences that helped confirm what they were doing and who they should marry. So, when it's all said and done, Paul, why don't you tell us, what are the main concepts then that we hope we get out of these chapters 3 through 7?
Well, it begins over there, actually, I think, with where Nephi begins his record, which is actually in 1 Nephi chapter 2, verse 16, after we have the introduction of his father. And then from chapter 2, verse 16 through the end of chapter 7, it's the beginning of Nephi's record. And he's going to teach us some very important things. One of them is, now that he's received his confirmation, he's ready to go forth and do the work of the Lord. And this in spite of opposition from his brothers. Also, we'll see that every one of them receives their trial in this period. Nephi does, Laman and Lemuel do, and their mother, Sarai, also receives her trial in this period. And they make it through with flying colors. I think there's something else that the text points out, and that is the Old Testament background of these people. They knew their Old Testament, they knew their law of Moses, and they're trying to live by it. As soon as the sons come back with the plates, what do? They make an offering to the Lord, a burnt offering. As soon as they come back with Ishmael and his family, there at the very end of chapter 7, they offer again the same kind of sacrifice they offered. They did offer sacrifice and burnt offerings unto the Lord, in fulfillment of Exodus chapter 10, verse 25. These are people who are trying to do the law of the Lord and live it to their best, and who have that burning testimony in their heart of what all of this means. At least Lehi and Nephi do. And we're hoping the whole time that Laman and Lemuel get the message and get on board. And it sets up the rest of the text of the Book of Mormon.
Nicely summarized. Thank you so much.